Hey, I want to thank you for being a guest here at CALMClass.com. This website is dedicated to one thing: to be able to give you a different mindset. To be able to stay calm in tough times is by changing how you think, because when you change how you think, it changes how you live. My name's Dwight Bain. I'll be your host through most of these lessons, but I'm really glad that you found us. I'm really glad that you're taking time out to watch a lesson that will be life-changing. So do this. Take good notes. Download the study guides. Let these life application principles make your life a better place. And then would you let us know how this is helping you? My thanks to you for watching. My thanks to our incredible team for making it happen. But most of all, my thanks to God, because He gives us principles that will change our life if we use them. Are you ready? Let's get started. God, thank you for these friends here in Orlando and for those friends that watch at CALMClass.com. I pray that you would use this lesson to challenge us about relationships. And especially, God, I pray you would use it to challenge me. Change hearts. Start with mine first. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you.
So it happened on January the 4th. Here's the news report. This is from CNN. The mistaken information last night that 12 of 13 miners trapped in a West Virginia coal mine had been saved, when in fact 12 were dead, only one came out alive. This happened through a series of miscommunications among rescue workers and others exhausted from more than 30 hours of searching and desperate for a good ending to a tragic situation. Here's the statement from the president of the mining company. They were looking desperately for good information. They wanted to share good information, said Bennett K. Hatfield, chief executive of the International Coal Group. And he expressed regret that at the moment when the bodies and the one survivor were found, the strict communication protocols set up to relay accurate information fell by the wayside. I don't think anyone had a clue how much damage was about to be created, he said. In the jubilation of the moment, the rules didn't hold. And it goes on to talk about the fact that here are these families, and this story was close to me because both my grandfathers worked in coal mines in Kentucky. The one was killed in a coal mine. The other died from complications of what's called black lung, from breathing in the toxic coal dust that gets into your lungs. I had an uncle, my dad's brother, was killed in a coal mine accident. So when I hear about coal mine accidents, that's close to home for my family. But then when I heard about it, here's the president of the coal company and CNN and all the news media saying 12 of 13 made it. And then the next morning it was like, whoops, 1 of 13 made it. And you say, how could they mess it up like that? Now, the president of the mining company, who was later replaced, he said it was a miscommunication. What I want you to know is in some companies, there's more than miscommunication. In some workplaces, it's kind of a toxic environment. Sometimes the managers and the leaders don't really care that much about the employees. Sometimes the employees don't care that much about the managers and the leaders. So when we're talking about toxic, I want you to get the sense, okay? This is a gas mask. And now I hope you don't need one of these because of your spouse's cooking and what the smells can emanate, or maybe after your spouse is cooking, the smells that can emanate. I won't go there. But if you'd had a breathing apparatus in that coal mine, 13 of 13 would have made it. It was toxic. And eventually they died. And if you're in a toxic relationship at work, eventually it's going to fail. If you're in a toxic relationship at home, it's not going to end well. If you're in a toxic relationship with a sibling, you may not talk to them again for years. Unless you have a way, and I won't try to put this on, I don't want to mess up my hair, actually.
Either one of them.
Either, yeah. I mean, you got to think about this, Larry. I have to work for hours to get it just right, and I'm not going to. I mean, this is like neoprene rubber. It would totally mess up my hair. But in a toxic relationship, I want you to understand, it's not in your study guide, but in a toxic relationship, eventually it will fail. toxic relationships erode trust, and eventually toxic relationships end the relationship. So it's not a question, will the relationship fail? That's a foregone conclusion. The only question is when and which person will endure the longest. Because in some situations, some people are better at breathing toxic fumes than others. Let's talk about it in your study guide. Emotionally destructive relationships, these toxic relationships, they're easy to identify, but they're very hard to change. Dr. Phil McGraw, the television psychologist, said emotional abuse can have devastating consequences on both physical and mental health. While emotional or psychological abuse may be difficult to pinpoint, examples abound. And think about toxic relationships and marriage, toxic relationship in families. In fact, when I think about toxic relationships in marriage, I thought it was interesting. George Herbert Walker Bush has been married longer than any other president. He said, and this is according to First Lady Barbara Bush, who said, "I married the first man I ever kissed. When I tell this to my children, they just about throw up." The partnership between John Adams and his wife Abigail, a woman who was well known for speaking out on women's rights, is one of the most famous marriages in history. While drawn to each other as steel and magnet, they also went through the trial of extended separation, sometimes as long as 5 years at a time. Political upheavals and personal tragedies. During their extensive separations, they relied on letters to keep the bond of their compelling and equal partnership in marriage alive. They met at ages 23 and 14. But their friendship blossomed into a steadfast, passionate, intellectually stimulating marriage that lasted 54 years until her death. So when we think about toxic relationships where there's conflict, I want you to understand, that's not bad. It's when it's dangerous conflict. When you take a look at this marriage and family, teenagers. I mean, there are sometimes situations I've heard about where teenagers are just saying horrible things to their parents. And the parents are saying things that sound horrible to a teenager, like, "No, you cannot have a new car." You know, that sounds horrible to a teenager. To a parent, that's just effective parenting. I remember a very wealthy businessman, and there was a major conflict with his 16-year-old daughter. And she was absolutely demanding a new car, not just a new car, a particular sports car. And I'll never forget what he said. He said, "My self-esteem is secure enough to say no to you. My self-esteem is secure enough that if at 16 years of age you're willing to scream and say, 'I hate you,'" the dad said, "That's okay. It's okay to hate me. You're still not getting a sports car at 16. Have a nice day. Thanks for shopping. Dads are us." Yes, ma'am.
The young man is on trial now because he killed his dad, murdered his dad, because his dad did not want to give him more money.
Yeah, that's true.
Going on right now.
Oh, that's very true. That's a very good point.
Oviedo, Florida.
Yeah, Oviedo, Florida, the case.
The man that killed his mother 20 years ago.
When we look at, and I'm really glad you brought that up, because we're talking today about toxic relationships, not ones that are abusive and dangerous. Dangerous abuse, if you don't deal with toxic stuff, it will die. It will end. It will be over. What I'm focusing on is the slow erosion before it gets to that point. In a dangerous, toxic situation, it will eventually lead to physical abuse, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, financial abuse. If you do not deal with toxic fumes, okay, don't panic. If you're watching a CALMClass, you're safe. Everybody else, don't panic. But if there were smoke coming out of these vents with a toxic nerve gas, like sarin nerve gas, I mean, you would die. It's interesting. It seems like the terrorist's favorite thing to do is have big explosions. You know, backpack bombs kind of thing, right? But the biggest thing in this room, by volume, is air. All right, so take a big breath. If there was toxic fumes, you just, by taking that big breath, hurt yourself. So our focus today is on the slow erosion and how you can breathe and not take in the toxic, eroding elements of a relationship. And I'm glad the issue of abuse and violence came up, because if you do not deal with those toxic fumes, those toxic elements of the relationship, it almost always will end in some type of tragedy. Back in your study guide, we take a look at this. Dating relationships can be toxic. And I had a list of all sorts of different examples of like personal ads that people wrote. And Sheila said some of those are not really appropriate, but I promise you, they were terribly funny. So if you're really bored, just look up like non-Valentine Day messages on like YouTube, or even better on Google. And when you look up the images, there will be these little like slogans and bumper stickers. But my favorite one was a White Castle. How many of you know what a White Castle is? All right, so the people that just raise their hands, these are the Yankees in the room. Okay, so be careful of the carpetbaggers if you understand what I'm talking about. But a White Castle is, would you say a White Castle is high on the food chain of restaurants, or a little bit on the low end? Low end. How would you know? I love White Castle. Yes, sir. John?
They're going out of business.
Are they going out of business?
They closed stores in Cleveland and in Indiana. They seem to be.
Well, but I want you to know, I'm sad to hear that White Castle is going out of business, but I found this sign when I was looking up like Valentine's Day fails or Valentine's Day silly messages, and this one had the marquee on a White Castle, and it said, "Make your Valentine's Day dinner reservations early," and it was right there, it had the phone number. And I thought, dang, if they only had White Castles here in Florida, I know where I would take Sheila for Valentine's. White Castle just cannot even compare. And I know Crystal tries to do, no, it's not a White Castle. I mean, what says I love you better than? But when I think about toxic relationships, those things made me laugh. Then I realized we're talking about a pretty serious subject. Because in a toxic dating relationship, here's the interesting thing. Frequently, the person who is in, quote, love, close quote, they're breathing the toxic fumes in the relationship, and they're saying, she's great, he's wonderful. And they're breathing the poison gas, and everybody else around them is saying, this is not a good fit. I don't think that's very wise. Are you sure about this? And it's really interesting that the only person who seems to not understand the toxicity and the danger is the one who's breathing those fumes. That's why I said we're focusing on the slow erosion. Dating relationships, many examples. Family relationships. And if you want to see this, go to a wedding or a funeral, sometimes a graduation, sometimes a baby christening. Because when you get all sides of the family together, you have the makings for a personal comedy. I mean, because unless you're in it. If you're in it, it's a personal tragedy, it's a drama. But otherwise, it's quite entertaining. So actually do this. Just go to places with your in-laws, and then you can see all the crazy drama and say, these people have some toxic issues. Thank God I don't have that, right? Where they talked about work and toxic work relationships. And it's interesting, the number one place, if you've ever heard me talk about crisis, you know the number one place you're likely to be killed, actually shot with a handgun is at work by a former employee or somebody else that worked there, a coworker. And you say, that's crazy. That's the number one place you're likely to be shot with a handgun. I stumbled because not killed with a handgun, because sometimes the people coming back, they're not that good with weapons, thankfully. But they're still at such an enraged point. What happens? All that toxic stuff builds up and eventually will blow up. Toxic relationships build up, and then eventually they will blow up. And the blow up part can have catastrophic impact. In a work relationship, it frequently can build up and blow up into violence. But a more common one is it builds up and then it blows up into theft. The Walt Disney Company, right here in our own backyard. The Disney Company's single greatest drain on resources is internal theft, employee theft. The Walmart Corporation, that's one of the biggest things that costs them money. It's not competitors, it's not offshore, it's internal theft, employee theft. Now, unless you were thinking, shoot, I'll go work for Disney or Walmart and I'll steal stuff, because those companies make billions of dollars, they can afford it. Let me assure you, those companies, as part of those billions of dollars they make, put cameras everywhere, and you will get caught. But why would people do that? And almost every day you pick up a newspaper and you read it, and it'll talk about somebody who stole from their company and got caught embezzling and now is going to prison. And you say, that doesn't make any sense. Why would they do that? Because if you're not dealing with some things in your life long enough, and your brain says, they owe this to me, I deserve more money, eventually that will turn into very catastrophic results. As you take a look at it at school, 2 school shootings this week, and I grieve. I think it's one of the reasons the homeschool movement is growing so fast and online college is growing so fast. I think a part of it is for safety, because you don't go to school and pay tuition to get shot and killed by another student. You say, that's crazy. What happens? If toxic, dangerous emotions build up to a certain point, they will blow up into dangerous, dangerous behavior. At the dangerous behavior, everybody says, oh my gosh, we should do something. And while I do not disagree with that sentiment, let me tell you, the time to do something is before it gets to that point. The time to fix the mechanical elements of a plane is before the plane is in the sky crashing, like we saw happen this week. Another plane crash. And you say, wow, Dwight, you are just a gloom and doom. Well, listen, that's why I'm going to be giving you gas masks at the end of this presentation, so you will not feel so depressed. Do not raise your hands on this one. Well, actually, you can raise your hands on the first part. Have you ever heard of a neighborhood association or a community association? Have you ever heard of that? Raise your hand. Yeah. All right, and do not raise your hands. Everybody, all hands down. And then how many of you have heard of the Nazis? Okay, you know, because apparently some of the people who escaped, you're running, communist places, apparently they have migrated to run homeowners associations. And if you don't believe that, paint your fence. Pick a color, pick a stain that you really like, make sure it's top grade, buy the most expensive stuff, because then the homeowner association will come and say, you're going to have to take your fence down. And the stories, oh my goodness gracious, the horror stories I could tell you, and then you probably know more. And you say, what happened? Well, toxic relationships, because somebody driving home one day said, I don't like the color stain on that fence. I think that fence is a half an inch off. And I'm telling you, there's a whole division downtown in the 9th Circuit Court for mediation for homeowner disputes. And it's always packed. It's always packed.
You heard about the homeowner that had a similar situation. The homeowners were associations coming after him. So when the president of the homeowners association was on a 2-week vacation, they paid to have their house painted bright orange.
Bright orange. Yeah, change the neighborhood.
It only took one person to get the cross down off the tower in St. Cloud.
Yeah, that's true. One person complained, took the cross down off the tower in St. Cloud after 50 years. But remember, toxic relationships, toxic fumes, toxic emotions build up, and then eventually they blow up. Oh, look at the last one. Do you think it's possible for those toxic relationships to come into a church?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
You ever heard of a church split?
Oh, yeah.
That's not a particular move in bowling. It's not a church split where it makes the shape of a cross. It's not bowling. A church split may be one of the most hurtful and painful. And I know there are people right here in this room and people watching at CALMClass. You've been part of that. And I think that one hurts more because we say, how in the world? I went to church with these people. How could they act this way? So mean and so selfish. Well, toxic fumes build up until somebody cannot think clearly because all they can think about is acting out. Right? Fumes build up, emotions build up, and then what happens is they blow up. Build up, blow up. So we take a look at this. Relationship erosion always leads to relationship collapse. See where it says big fights don't usually end the relationship? One single big fight doesn't usually end the relationship. It's the erosion of these factors: disagreements, resentments, conflicts, bitterness, passive-aggressive behavior. No, I'm not talking about your mother-in-law. Criticisms, comparisons. The erosion of a little bit of toxic behavior here, a little bit of toxic behavior there, and pretty soon, you've got a seriously emotionally destructive relationship going on. The good news is we can do things about it. The bad news is until we do something about it, it gets worse. Here's the sad reality. And I think I could do a whole lesson on this. People who say they love the most may create the greatest hurt. And that's a terribly sad reality. I love that person, but frequently the one who says, I love them the most, is the one who brings the most hurt. Doesn't that seem like an odd paradox? Yeah, I love my kids. That's why I dump all this verbal garbage and cuss them and go off on them and tell them how horrible and terrible they are, because I love them. And you think, that doesn't even make any sense. I love my spouse. That's why I'm so hostile and critical and attacking. Wait a minute, time out. I mean, to quote the great philosopher Tina Turner, what's love got to do with it, got to do with it? What's love but a second-hand emotion? I left my wig in the car and the stilettos, because I had that one down. I was going to rock it. Am I on the Grammys tonight? They couldn't handle this kind of talent. I would go to the Grammys, and you know what they would do, Marty? Thank you for bringing that up, because I think they would kick everybody else out of the building and say, thank God we finally got some talent in this building. Because listen to me, Marty, I'm telling you the truth here. No one sings like me.
Thank you, Lord.
No one sings like me. People there have never heard a sound like would come out of this. They've never heard that kind of sound. It would collapse the music industry. It would collapse the music industry right now.
Mike,
Yes, sir?
can we do a class on ego?
But who would teach it? Who would teach it? No, John, when you have musical talent like this, you keep it under wraps. Don't want to get arrested.
So now we know what we can get you for Christmas.
Yeah, the karaoke machines.
And auto-tune.
Auto-tune, yeah. If you don't know what auto-tune is, a lot of pop singers who apparently do not have the best voices, auto-tune makes their voice sound flawless. It's a computer program.
Wow.
That's why if you hear them in person, you go, they weren't that good. And then you hear them on a radio station or on a CD, and you go, they're brilliant.
Is that like Milli Vanilli?
Well, no, they did lip sync.
That was just
That was
recording.
just dubbed. But auto-tune, a lot of the pop singers, so you hear them sing the Star Spangled Banner at an event, and you go, boy, their voice was cracking, and it was off, and then you hear them in a movie or a soundtrack, and you go, oh, they're just wonderful. Auto-tune. And I'm just wishing I could auto-tune for all elements of my life. It just, you hit the computer button, and it just corrects things. Auto-tune for hair. Okay, when we look at this, toxic relationships fail from a combination of 4 factors. Allegations, accusations, arguing, and attacks. Allegations, accusations, arguing, and attacks. One more time. Allegations, such as, where were you? Who were you with? What were you doing? You're a liar. You'll never see the kids again. You're worthless. You're stupid. It's my money. What do you need it for? Can't you get anything right? Did I say you could do that? Allegations, accusations, arguing, and attacks. You make me so mad. You're just wrong. You'll never get it. You bring the worst out of me. So here's a question for you. With all of these different arguing, allegations, attacks, all these different elements, where do you think toxic relationships are the easiest to spot? Okay? Are they easier to spot in a personal relationship? Are they easier to spot in a neighborhood association? Are they easier to spot at work? Are they easier to spot at church? Where are toxic, emotionally destructive relationships where there's this eroding kind of conflict, just friction all the time? Are these easier to spot in marriage, in family, or are they easier to spot at this time of the year when we think about dating relationships? Where are toxic emotions, toxic relationships easier to spot? There's a list on the other page where it said, like family and teenagers and work and church and neighborhood. Where is it easier to spot? Let's think about it. This also gives us a chance to talk to the people at your table, learn their names, learn their names, learn their names. Hi, my name is Dwight, what's yours? Learn their names, learn their names, learn their names, and then answer the question, where are toxic, destructive relationships easiest to spot? Go. eroding relationships, are those easier to spot at home? How many of you said at home? Family relationships, marriage and family, okay? How many of you said, no, that's easier to spot at work? Easier to spot at work, okay? Yeah, a couple people. How many of you said that's easier to spot in neighborhood homeowner associations? I'm curious though, did anybody say, no, toxic relationships, that's easier to spot in dating? Anybody say that one?
I said other people.
All the above? Doesn't it seem odd to you? Yeah, Marty? Oh, and it's the same thing. I've seen how people will talk to their children in stores, and even once, it was around Christmas time, I saw a mom, and she was just berating these two little kids, preschool age, and she was going off on them. And I'll never forget, I'm just walking through a parking lot, and I said, ma'am, I'm a mental health counselor, and you're doing destructive things to your children. Would you please hush?
Wow.
And she got up in my face, in my space, and told me what she thought of me and my mother. Which was odd, Jamie, because my mother wasn't even there.
Well, at least it took the heat off the kids.
Yes, sir.
No, it's
How
awesome.
about a Super Bowl party? A kid shot another guy when he was in his house. It happened this week. Did you hear
Oh, yeah.
about that?
Yeah, I mean, these toxic relationships will build up with roommates, because there's the one roommate who steals the food, and the other roommate who resents them stealing the food. And then who eventually, and I mean, it can get totally bizarre, then eventually, tries to put something in the food to get the other person. These toxic things will build up until it is totally out of control and crazy, but proving the impetus behind country music. I think the only place you do not notice toxic relationships is when you're falling in love with your seventh partner. It's like, instead of saying I'm going to find the love of my life, I'm waiting for somebody to write a country song called I'm finding the love of my night. It's just one night, baby. That's all I need, yeah.
Dwight, this is not new. Can you consider Cain and Abel?
Ooh, good one. Cain and Abel, first humans born on the planet murdered each other. Yep. Strong family, strong faith, and watch this one, no Facebook. See that? Because now there's a type of depression literally called Facebook depression,
Seriously.
where people stalk each other on social media, not making this up, and they really say hurtful things and do hurtful things, and they take their toxicity to new levels. All right, I think there was somebody else had their hand up, John.
Yes.
But Tim, do they know they rage?
No.
Yeah.
I have no
See,
concept
that's
of
one
it.
of the interesting things about these toxic relationships. It's like the only one that doesn't know they're toxic is the one who's doing it, right? Yeah? Jared, you have a thought?
Well, I was going to say, we weren't looking for a place where there's like family or a theme park. I think toxic relationships exist in insecure people, because an insecure person can become abusive, or an insecure person can end up being abused.
Yeah.
And I think if you're insecure, as well as if you don't have a constitution in your life, like a moral code or a religious belief to be like Christ.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You know.
That's a perfect lead-in into the lesson. If you jump over to page 5 in your study guide, there's a couple of pages of just thinker questions from my friend Leslie Bernick. She wrote a book, a very wonderful book, and it explains it well, called The Emotionally Destructive Relationship, where she goes into great detail, and I've given you 30 different questions from that book, as well as a website where you can download her resources to be able to identify, are you in a toxic relationship, an emotionally destructive relationship, and if so, what to do about it and how to get out of it. I'll give you the 3 main themes of toxic relationships. And I agree with what Jared said. Insecure people do insecure things. Toxic relationships lead to surrender. That's where one person in the relationship always gives up. Fine, you're right. I'm wrong. You're right. Surrender. That's a toxic relationship. Survival. That's the type of relationship where somebody's always trying to avoid conflict. They're not just, agreeing with the person to try to get the fight to stop. They're trying to get out of there. They sometimes will overwork. not because they love work or need the money. They overwork so they don't have to deal with somebody in their life. I'll tell you one that's very common. They over-volunteer with charitable organizations, not because they love the work of that charitable organization. It's not about Jesus. It's about I can't deal with the person in my life. And so there are lots of ways that people are avoiding. That's the survival mode in a relationship. But look at this one. A person who's able to reach a place to speak the truth. That's a strong relationship. Now, does it mean that it's going to be without conflict? No, it guarantees there'll be conflict. It's just having the courage to speak the truth. Ephesians 4:15 is the pivotal point in the book of Ephesians. Ephesus is a pretty cool place. It's in Asia Minor, so everybody that's coming from Asia goes through Ephesus. Everybody coming from Israel or Africa goes through Ephesus. Everybody coming from Europe to be able to go to the other parts of the world goes through Ephesus. And so when Paul starts this church in Ephesus, the whole book of Ephesians is about conflict. The first half, he's laying a foundation of trust building. The second half, he's confronting anger in marriage, in family, with employees and employers, in churches, and spiritual warfare. But the pivotal verse in the entire book of Ephesians is 4:15. Speaking the truth in love. And that's the key to this whole element with dysfunctional and toxic relationships. Speaking the truth in love. That's what a strong person does. Hey, you're really being controlling. You need to work on that. Speaking the truth in love. You drink too much, and when you drink, you say horrible things to the people in our family. Hey, what you just said to me as an employee is actually against labor law, and I don't know why you would say that. I don't want to leave. I just want you to be accountable. Hey. See, it's bringing up, and that's what a strong person does. And let me show you an incredible example in the Bible. I saw it this week, and I've never heard a lesson taught about Princess Michael. Now, some of you who are from a day and an age, you go, he's talking about transgender? No, that's how you pronounce her name. It was a girl. It was a girl. But you pronounced her name Michael. It's spelled differently. But Princess Michael in the Bible, in 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel. Here's some facts about Princess Michael. She was the youngest daughter of David's rival, King Saul. All right, so she's young and she's a princess. And the implication that we know from Scripture is that she had no problem being a spoiled princess and used to getting things her way. I know there's Disney princesses and they're all nice and wonderful, but occasionally there's Princess Ride the Broom, you understand what I'm saying, and she's just not a nice person. But here's what we know about Princess Michael. She was caught up in a dangerous family feud. She was the one girl between a powerful king and the man who would be king. Princess Michael was second prize for winning a battle with the Philistines. Because King Saul said to David, who one day would be king, had already been prophesied he would be king, and King Saul said, hey, David, would you like to marry my daughter? It was a way to, you go from shepherd boy to royalty, when you marry into royalty. And David said, I'm not worthy. And King Saul said, here's all you have to do. Kill 100 of the Philistines. Kill 100 of my enemies. Prove that you killed them, and you can marry my daughter, Merab. That was Michael's older sister. Merab was beautiful. She was talented. She was a prize. And David said, are you kidding me? Whoa, dude! It's in the original, you see the roll to it.
What version was that?
Deuteronomy.
It's the Yo Bro version.
He hooked it up.
And so David says, done. He goes out, he kills 100. Actually, he goes out and kills 200 to prove a point. And Saul goes, dang, you did it. And he gives Merab to somebody else. Second prize, well, I've got this other daughter. And Saul finds out that Michael has a crush on David. And Saul goes, oh. And 1 Samuel records that Saul said, she will be a snare to him. So we know that Michael had some strong, powerful emotions. It doesn't tell us that she had a histrionic personality disorder, but it does tell us that she was a very strongly emotional woman. And David gets her a second prize. So now he's the king's son-in-law. Michael's brother, Jonathan, loves David. Fantastic story of friendship in the Bible, probably one of the most powerful. Jonathan says, David, I think you should be king. Jonathan's next in line. Jonathan should be king. Jonathan says, David, God has his hand on you. You should be king. Michael says, I just love you. In fact, look at this. She was used as a pawn by her father, then her husband. And in 1 Samuel 18:20, she's the only woman in the Bible who is recorded as loving her husband. Now, did women love their husband in the Bible? Sure. She just had such strong emotions. She's the only one where they wrote it down. She desperately loved David. And she's a pawn in a relationship. And I think this story is hard for us, and I think one of the reasons I've never heard anybody teach on it is nobody wants to say that King David had some flaws, with the exception of the Bathsheba thing. I've heard lots of sermons on that one. But I've not heard a lot of sermons, in fact none, that said, David, you were really selfish with this girl. She was a pawn because, you see, back in that day and age, if you married somebody from a rich family, it gave you access to wealth and power. Do you think that's changed in today's world?
No.
There was a really dumb reality show. It's off the air, thankfully. But the concept behind it was they took a doppelganger, an actor who looked just like one of the royal princes in England, and then they told these girls, let me just say, not the sharpest knives in the drawer, right? And they told these girls, you're going to meet an actual prince, and they filmed it in an actual castle setting with, like, limousines and all the royalty kind of stuff. And they convinced these 20 girls, if you could just win this prince's attention and affection, you could be the next queen of this country. That was a dumb concept because royalty's not allowed to go on reality TV shows. Because if you've ever traveled to England, you know they just live a reality TV show all the time. You don't have to be on TV. That's just how they live, right? But these girls were just doing, Jill and I watched, like the second or third week, and she said, I wanted to see what this is. And we did it maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10, because it was pretty disgusting. And they're putting these girls, swim through mud to be able to get to spend time with the prince kind of thing. And I thought, this is just stupid. It's degrading to these young women, who some of them, their daddies didn't teach them exactly how to dress in certain public settings with royalty. And then she said, it's not just a game show for them. It's a chance at a new life. Because think about it. If you're a waitress, and here's royalty, your only chance maybe of ever living in a castle, visiting a castle, riding in a private jet, having wealth, is that prince. Maybe that's why up until the most recent Disney animated feature, One Day My Prince Will Come. And it was all about Cinderella finding the prince. It was all about Snow White finding a prince. It was all about Princess Ariel finding a prince. Belle turning him back into a prince. The whole thing was about find the right prince. And the Frozen movie wasn't about that. I'm not going to spoil it because if you haven't seen it, it's a really good story. But to be able to say, I'm going to find the right person that's going to fix all my problems. Nah, you've watched too many TV shows. One person can create more problems. I'll agree to that. And with Princess Michael, she was a pawn in this incredibly powerful, ugly, worse than a reality TV show. And yet she's the only woman in the Bible recorded as saying, I love my husband. She desperately loved her husband. She saved David's life by helping him escape from her father's soldiers who were coming to murder him. And she knew that. She openly lied to her father to protect her husband so he could be king. Listen to what she said to her daddy, who was the king. You gave him to me as a husband. He is a soldier and a violent man, and he held a sword on me, and he made me help him. Complete fabrication and lie. And yet she was willing to lie to her dad to protect him and save his life. Would you say that sounds like a loving thing to do? Yeah. Listen to how she got paid back for that kind act. David abandoned her for 7 years and married 2 other women. Abigail and Ahinoam, and both of them were wealthy widows. So would you say that King David, not called a man after God's own heart at this point in the Bible, would you say that he's a really good guy and a really, wholesome, good relationship? He abandons his first wife. He goes and marries not one, but two other women. And they both have wealth and resources that he needed for his battles. And he abandons her. Yeah, she was a princess. Yeah, she was probably spoiled. But he could have sent for her multiple times and never did. So think about Princess Michael's life every day. Maybe one day my prince will come. Maybe one day my husband will come back. And then she starts to hear word of, he married her? He's with her? It's a small country. Word gets around. It goes on for years. After David abandoned her, Saul gives her away to another husband, Paltiel, who adored her. The Bible makes it clear that she's very emotional, loved her husband. This man so adored her that later he was weeping and following her because she was taken away from him. This is a really odd story of toxicity. And they tell him, if you don't stop weeping, because David got back in power and said, yeah, I want her back. And I want her taken away from that guy. And he's weeping to the point that the soldiers who took her forcibly back to David, the soldiers say, if you don't shut up, we're gonna kill you right here. Because he's following her weeping. You can read in 2 Samuel. David reclaimed her for political purposes because by taking back the princess of Saul, the daughter of Saul, politically he was able to show the entire country, I'm back in power. It wasn't for emotional reasons. She had a lot of built up anger, 7 years, I guess so. And she rebuked him openly because of how he danced. Not because, white men can't dance. Not one of those things. Apparently, well, let me just read it. It's in 2 Samuel 6. David danced before the Lord with all of his might. David was wearing a linen ephod. Think of, like a sports outfit. Very uncommon in that day and age for a king to wear that. They wore royal robes, right? So David on the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of a trumpet. Now as the ark of the Lord came into the city, Michal, Saul's daughter, looked through the window. She saw King David leaping and whirling before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. So they brought the ark of the Lord. They set it in its place in the midst of the tabernacle that David had erected for it. Then David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. And when David had finished offering the burnt offerings and the peace offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of hosts. He distributed among the people, among the whole multitude of Israel, both the men and women, to everyone a loaf of bread, a piece of meat, a cake of raisins. So the people departed, everyone to their home. All right, they came, they ate, they went home with provisions. It's a big day for David. He's established as the king. He's established that God is the God of Israel. David returned to bless his household, just like he had the entire country. And Michal, notice, this is his legal wife. And she's introduced as the daughter of Saul. Came out to meet David and said, how glorious was the king of Israel today, uncovering himself in the eyes of the maids and servants, as one of the base fellows shamelessly uncovers himself. Now remember, they've been married for a long time, even though they did not have a committed relationship. And she does this publicly. I can remember vividly. And everybody involved in it's dead, so I can tell the story. My parents made great sacrifices. They sent me and my sister to a Christian school to give us greater educational opportunity. And my life was better because of it. But they had fundraiser type things to pay for and fund the Christian school because tuition did not cover it, much like schools today. And I'll never forget that a husband and wife, in the middle of a fundraising deal, and I don't remember why I was there, but it was a private meeting of about maybe 20 husbands and wives. And all of a sudden, this guy stood up and said, hell's too good for you. And there was a meeting about other things than hell that day. It was about building a gymnasium, actually. And I thought, now this is entertaining. And she stood up, and I don't remember what she said, but I'll never forget. He jumped up, got in her face, and said, hell's too good for you. And I thought, well, there's a story going on there. And then later I thought, I wonder why they would do that in public. Haven't you been in situations, whether it be at a church or a school or a neighborhood association, and people are venting on each other and you think, why would they do that publicly? Well, the reason, if you let toxic things build up in a relationship, privately, it will always come out publicly. If you let it build up privately, it will always come out publicly. That's why wisdom is deal with things privately. Because if you don't deal with it privately, that's why. And you think, man, celebrities must really be screwed up. Well, maybe they are. I don't know if they're more screwed up than the rest of us, but I know this. If you do not deal with things in your private life, it has nowhere to go but your public life. If you're dealing with private sins, those will become public sins. Just give it time. Private tension and toxicity always will blow up into public, and that's what happened for them. And King David said to Michal, "It was before the Lord. I was dancing before the Lord who chose me instead of your father and all of his house to appoint me ruler over the people of the Lord, over Israel. Therefore I will play music before the Lord." Remember, he was a singer, a songwriter, a guitar player before he was a soldier. Remember, he would go and play the lyre, play a stringed instrument before Saul to take the evil spirit away from Saul. "And I will be even more undignified than this, and I will be humble in my own sight. But as for the maidservants of whom you have spoken, by them I will be held in honor." Therefore Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no children until the day of her death. One of the worst things that could happen to a woman in Israel was to not have children. She was the legal wife of David, and he never touched her again. They never had a relationship after that. The toxic relationship built up, and it blew up. It started in private, and it became very ugly and very public. Let me give you 4 different things that happen in these toxic relationships. Number 1, because toxic relationship is like a fire. Listen to James chapter 2. "It only takes a spark to set off a forest fire. A careless or wrongly placed word out of your mouth can do that. By our speech, we can ruin the world, turn harmony into chaos, throw mud on a reputation, send the whole world up in smoke, and go up in smoke with it. Smoke right from the pit of hell." Wow. I mean, James says you have to deal with these emotions early on. If not, it's like this massive fire that destroys. And remember, the number one disaster that destroys people's homes in the U.S. is still fire. Forest fires and household fires. Number 1 reason that people are likely to lose their home. Not flood, fire. So when there's a fire, should you fight fire with fire? You've heard that. In a relationship, if you fight with fire, you've heard the saying, fight with fire. That means to stand up assertively to protect your rights and fight back. This can be a very dangerous approach, because to be very, that's fire. Gasoline is the first one. Thanks some of you for looking confused. It's so helpful. It's like, where's he at? 4 main approaches when there's a fire. You can pour gasoline on a fire, okay? Gasoline on a fire does not make the fire go out. Gasoline on a fire singes the hair off of your face and arms. I know this from firsthand experience as a college student. When my dad said, "We've got all this brush piled up, I need you to just stand here and burn it," while he was doing something else on a farm that my mom had back then. And I thought, and this was, brush twice as tall as me. They'd knocked down a bunch of trees and things, and you can do that out in the country. And there was some kerosene, and my job was to stand there all day and to burn this stuff and watch it and keep it safe, right? There was also a 5-gallon can of gasoline up near, the shed, and I thought, well, this will, gasoline, it'll work faster, right? Guess what? Gasoline will burn faster. In fact, it will not just, because I thought about it. I didn't pour all 5 gallons, but I got a cup, like a big gulp, and it was starting to melt through the cup, and I thought I need to move kind of quickly here because this is not in my plan. And so I took the cup and I threw the cup into the fire. I did not understand back as a college student the term Molotov cocktail, although apparently it functions that way. And I will never forget, Jay, this is just incredible. So I throw this big gulp of gasoline into a fire that I'd started with the kerosene, and it just wasn't going fast. And not only did it go whoosh, but then it was trailing back to me, actually, and the cup in my hand. And I mean, I threw it, and and I guess there was like a fume or a vapor, and it came back and it singed all the hair off my arm, my eyebrows, most of my eyelashes, and my hair. I had hair in those days. But the fireball was the bigger problem, because my dad and his brother, my uncle, came about 10 minutes later. They were kind of further away, and in a rather colorful way asked me what I had been doing, and I said, just burning this as you requested. By then I'd looked into the rearview mirror on the car and seen, I have no hair on my face. So if you pour gasoline on a fire, bad plan. Gasoline on a fire is aggression. You know, you call me that? Yeah, well, you're a bigger one. Do you know what you are? Okay, so gasoline, aggression, bad plan. Fight fire with fire, that's assertiveness, frequently a bad plan. Silence, this is the worst. Silence is to go apathetic, and that will not solve a toxic relationship. Water is what you want. And water is to accept what is going on and to speak the truth in a loving way. I think I've given you a text box in your note. How do I respond to these toxic relationships? You can respond in an active way or a passive way. It's a grid. It's like a square. One field is active, one field is passive. One field is destructive on the y-axis, one field is constructive. Destructive or constructive, active or passive. Speak the truth in a loving way. So here's the principles to be able to rebuild trust. Principles to rebuild trust in a toxic relationship. Number one, second chances. If it's safe. Remember, these relationships can get quite dangerous. Grace instead of pride. You could be wrong. In fact, turn to somebody at your table and say, you could be wrong. You could be wrong. And you can always tell the people who are kind of prideful, because they'll go, I don't think so. Okay. Grace instead of pride. Real instead of pretend. Speak out instead of staying silent. Because toxic relationships, you have to speak out. Failure is a growth experience instead of failure being the final experience. Accepting responsibility instead of blame shifting. Apologies given instead of apologies demanded. I think it says expected, but really it's apologies demanded. I can say anything I want, but you're not allowed to say anything. That's toxic. That's toxic. Hugs instead of hitting. Companionship instead of solitude. Because that's what relationships are about. And loving the person instead of fighting to win a point. Loving the person instead of fighting to win the point. So in West Virginia, in a coal mine accident, where 12 people died, one was saved because of the toxic fumes. This is a copy of a note that one of the rescuers made for me that was written because it took a couple of hours for the 12 different men to die. So they had a little bit of time. They had headlamps on their helmets. They had light, even though the explosion knocked out the lights that were wired in. They still had headlamps. And this is a copy of the note. Because in a toxic relationship, it's all about, I'm right, you're wrong. In a trusting relationship, it's all about, what can we do to make this work? Here's the note, actual note, or a copy of the note. Tell all I see it wasn't bad. I just went to sleep, which is how you die when those toxic fumes. Tell them I see them on the other side, and it's signed JR. And then P.S. I love you. See, in a toxic relationship, it's going to kill the relationship. And sometimes you have to say goodbye, and you say, I love you, but I'm not going to live in toxic situations. In a healing relationship, you're able to say, man, I'm sorry, let's try it again. The goal of today's lesson was to be able to move from toxicity to trust. And you do that just like JR did in this note. You do that with words. Because even though the news media got it wrong, toxic, do you think that when this note was found on his body, that it gave his wife comfort? Do you think they had fights? Yeah, most people do. But I think this note, and somebody was kind enough to make a copy for me, which I keep framed in my office. This note reminds me that in the most toxic of relationships, if you can use words in an appropriate way, you can change everything. Ephesians 4:15, speak the truth in a loving way. That's what changes everything. Let's pray that we do. God, thank you for these friends, those that watch at CALMClass. Help each of us to move from being toxic to being real by speaking your truth. And I pray that in Christ's name. Amen. God bless. Hi, Dwight Bain here, and I want to tell you about CALMClass.com. The website that you came to is actually a teaching lesson that we record in Orlando, Florida, every single week. You can actually come be part of the live audience. If you're in Florida, maybe you're visiting the Orlando area, come check us out. We meet at 3000 South John Young Parkway. It's on the campus of First Baptist Orlando, which is actually a pretty large place. So what you're looking for is a large building by a lake. It's a big 3-story building called Faith Hall. And we're in Faith Hall, upstairs in room 301. But if you don't get a chance to come live to the presentation in Orlando, then if these lessons about making your life work better, to get past frustration in relationships, maybe frustrations on the job, maybe you're just kind of feeling beat up about what you believe. If you enjoy these lessons, would you do me a favor? Would you tell a friend? Because by your experience of telling other people, hey, this website helped me, these lessons helped me, when you're doing that, you're helping take the message that we teach in Orlando and to be able to spread that to the entire world. And thanks.